Good morning, Star People. On your screen is a live view of Starship awaiting its second integrated flight test from Starbase, Texas. If all goes well, our Starship spacecraft and the Super Heavy booster, which we collectively call Starship, will lift off together for the second time in just 33.5 minutes from now. Thanks for tuning in. We're excited to be joining you from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California for today's flight test. Now, there's nothing quite like launch day, and especially so when it's a test flight. It just hits different. We're super excited to be here.
Exactly, Kate, and we're excited to be here to watch Starship, which is the latest and largest vehicle developed to date by SpaceX. And we're building it to fly exciting missions, to get massive payloads into orbit, to land astronauts on the moon for the first time in 50 years, and ultimately to get humanity to Mars.
But the fundamental revolution with Starship is that it's designed to be a fully, rapidly reusable, reliable rocket, or what we refer to as the 4 Rs. For those of you following along, you know all too well that Starship gave us quite a show during its first flight test back in April. After successfully lifting off and clearing the pad, Starship became the most powerful rocket ever launched.
But during the ascent, we had leaking propellant in the bottom of the booster, which led to sustained fires, loss of control, and ultimately a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. Of course, there's no test quite like a flight test, and our teams learned a lot, which began design changes and then ultimately hardware upgrades. That iterative approach is a big part of how SpaceX does development, and it's been the basis for all of our major innovations, including those on Falcon, Dragon, and Starlink.
I have to comment what gorgeous sunrise views we have here of Starship. Now, while that first flight ended in fireworks, it delivered valuable test data, which our teams have used to rapidly iterate on Starship's overall design, including significant upgrades to the ship, the booster, and the ground systems. Now, the most notable change is to the stage separation system, which will also be the most challenging part of today's test. We'll talk a little bit more about those updates a bit later in the webcast.
Now, in preparation for today's flight test, the vehicles have undergone dozens of individual tests, including a static fire on the ship, 2 super heavy static fires, and a final full wet dress rehearsal that we completed at the end of October, where we loaded the vehicles fully up with propellants and tested our new countdown sequences. And that brings us to these beautiful shots on today's flight test day. After 7 months of hard work by the entire SpaceX team, we're ready to give launch another shot.
100%. Now, once again, just like Flight 1, excitement is in the air. The electricity is certainly starting to grow. This is a live view of our Starbase Control Center known as Star Command. It is 6 miles from the pad. We also have teams gathering here right behind us in Hawthorne, California at our Mission Control Center. You can see the crowd gathering. It is an early morning, but you got to wake up early to get that front row seat. And we also have public gathering on the beaches at South Padre Island, as you see there.
And I can't say this enough, today is a flight test. While it's not happening in a lab or on a test stand, today is absolutely a test. And the goal is to gain invaluable data to continue rapidly improving Starship. So whatever the mission outcome today, excitement is guaranteed.
Now, if all goes well, Super Heavy will fire its 33 Raptor engines and lift off from that pad right there in Starbase. About 3 minutes into flight, we hope to see the Super Heavy booster separate from the ship in SpaceX's first ever hot stage separation. This means that the second stage will light its engines while still attached to a partially lit booster. If the ship's engine's light, and if the whole thing holds together, its engines will remain lit for about 6 minutes before the coast phase.
Now, with those big ifs, if we get past a successful stage separation, the booster is going to perform a flip maneuver, then execute a boost back burn before it attempts a splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. In the meantime, Starship will coast for about an hour at altitudes ranging between 150 and 250 kilometers before it makes its own re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and then ultimately a hard splashdown in the Pacific Ocean.
Now, again, if we get past a successful stage separation, Super Heavy will leave the ship at an altitude and trajectory just shy of orbital, meaning Starship won't have to fire its Raptor engines for a deorbit burn and will naturally come back into the atmosphere. Now, meanwhile, Super Heavy will attempt a landing burn before splashing into the Gulf. While the booster will practice a landing, we do not plan to recover any hardware from Super Heavy or the ship on this particular flight. Now, with the exception of Falcon, this really is no different than what happens to most other rockets flying today that are expended or fall into the ocean after completing their mission.
Now, even though we aren't planning recovery, the telemetry and data that we receive all the way to the end of today's mission is really what we're looking for, particularly with respect to temperatures during reentry and how the heat shield performs. Much like our first test, we want to gather as much data as we can around the fully integrated vehicle in this flight-like environment.
Exactly. So let's talk about some objectives for today. The primary goal for Flight 1 was to clear the pad. We did that, and we got amazing data that helped us to improve the vehicle and pad that you see right there today. This time, on Flight 2, we're hoping to get all the way through stage separation, where we will try to perform this hot staging maneuver. In the bigger picture, ascent is the most critical objective today, and everything else is learning. Like I said last time, a few times, the further we fly, the more data we can collect.
Now, we do expect that the camera views will be spotty after stage separation, and that's because we rely on ground stations that are positioned along the globe along the trajectory. But we are experimenting with Starlink on both the booster and ship on this mission, which will be communicating with our satellites in orbit to see if we can get that data.
Yeah, so if we make it past stage separation, there is a chance that we could get better live views throughout the duration of the flight test, including re-entry, where we typically have a blackout period with no communication with the vehicle whatsoever. So all that said, this is the first time that the vehicle will attempt to communicate with Starlink in orbit, so no guarantees.
Now, we're at T-minus 27 minutes, so let's check in with John for an update on the countdown. How are we looking, John?
Thanks, Shiva. We're currently loading propellant from the ground system into both the first and second stages, and we're on schedule for launch in just over 26 minutes from now. Now, we delayed a day getting here. Yesterday, on Friday, we had to replace a discrepant grid fin actuator on the first stage. We also replaced 2 other actuators as a precaution. The stages were remated, checked out, and everything was go for where we are right now this morning. Now, as I mentioned, we are in propellant loading. Both vehicles, the first and second stages, use the same 2 propellants. Our fuel is liquid methane at a temperature of just over 100 Kelvin, or about 272 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. This is a different fuel from Falcon 9, where we use the RP1 kerosene. But our oxidizer is liquid oxygen, the same as Falcon 9. Because there is no oxygen in space to support combustion, we have to bring our own. We did the weather poll and the go-no-go poll at T-minus 2 hours. We got the goes, and we started loading both propellants on the booster at T-minus 1 hour and 36 minutes. And at T-minus 1 hour and 17 minutes, we began propellant loading of the ship second stage. Propellant loading of the Starship second stage main tanks will complete at approximately T-minus 22 minutes, just a few minutes from now. And at about the same time, we will switch over to loading the header tanks in the nose of the ship. Meanwhile, it'll be T-minus 3 minutes when Super Heavy prop load completes on the first stage. And at that point, all propellant will be on the rocket, fully loaded with over 10 million pounds of propellant.